Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Grace Ueng. I will tell you all about Grace in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the courage we exert for others. But when you do it as a leader, as you will very much discover that Grace is, we do it with a singular purpose of bringing people together for common cause. Grace Ueng, welcome to Grace Under Pressure.
Thank you so much, John. It's really a pleasure being with you. You're such an inspiration to so many.
Well, you're so kind. Grace Ueng is the founder and CEO of a company called Savvy Growth. It's dedicated to helping leaders and companies maximize success. Founded nearly 20 years ago as the Savvy Marketing Group, her firm offers management consulting, executive coaching, and she's a world-renowned speaker. And she's a member of Fortune, considered a rising star. And while she went to MIT, yes, the MIT, she also earned her MBA at Harvard Business School, yes, the HBS, and she is teaching at UNC and Sloan School and places like that. So she's a published author, and I mentioned motivational speaker, and she's an extraordinary person. There is so much. I'm getting to know Grace a little better, but she and my interests in hers intersect in many different ways, and I hope we can cast a light on that. Grace Ueng, welcome to Grace Under Pressure today.
Thank you so much.
So you write about happiness a lot. What drew you to that topic? So
I started being interested just over 7 years ago in the topic of happiness because personally, I was going to become an empty nester with my only child, my son, entering college. And I was fearful that I would be thrown into despondency because of my genetic predisposition toward this. And also because I'm a single mom and my son was such a huge part of my life. So I started studying happiness back then. And then I realized pretty quickly that the study of positive psychology could benefit my coaching clients. So it ended up being a year-long study of positive psychology. And then most recently, because of a severe depressive episode that I went through last year, I can share more about how I've started it again. And actually, I just signed up for a year-long course with my initial teacher, Talpin Shahar, who was the creator of the happiness course at Harvard.
Great. Now, it's exciting. We'll touch on this. Now, not only have you've been very candid about mental health, but some years ago, you're a very physically fit and active and challenging person. I think you climb mountains. You had a bike accident, did you not? And what was the result of that, Grace?
Yeah, well, I literally went downhill at 40. That was many years ago.
It sounds funny, but I don't mean to be laughing.
Yeah,
but yes.
So for my 40th birthday, I treated myself to a cycling expedition in the Bay Area in Sonoma. And I was ended up being airlifted off Sonoma Mountain Road, unconscious with a broken neck and a bunch of the most scary part was I had a closed head injury, so a brain injury, and my memory was really random. My long-term memory came alive, my short-term memory is gone. So I was speaking in Chinese because my first words were gan gan, which means dry. And I was telling my mom not to change my diaper.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of wild things happen as a result of that accident.
Yeah. So, but you've been, and it taught you, it gave you a sense of inner resilience, did it not?
It taught me so many things because I had a lot of time on my back to recover. Because with a head injury, really, it takes time for your brain to recover. And then I had a broken neck too, which was in a brace, which made me not able to do a lot of things like drive. So I had a lot of time to think. And I became intrigued by several things. I was interested in the correlation between successful entrepreneurs and those who are endurance athletes. And I ended up writing about that after I got better. And then I also just realized that all of us have our own cycling accident metaphorically. Like I had one literally, but we all are going through our own issues. So I like to say back then, my key aha, which seems so obvious now, is that we all have our own cycling accidents.
Right. Moments that challenge us and come. And, it's interesting you mentioned that, Grace, because and I'm sure you probably just encountered this. And I've said this many times. I'm almost without regard, every senior leader that I've ever worked with has had that moment. I hadn't called it a bicycle accident, but where he or she was rising to the top and a boss pulled them aside and said, "You're doing the right things, but if you don't make some changes, you're not going anywhere." And does that resonate with you, Grace?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that everyone goes through these. And recently I was working with a coaching client, and one of the things that she was in her late 30s, first-time CEO. And one of the things that she knew she had to work on was increasing her vulnerability. And I shared my own story that before, maybe when I was in my 30s, when I became an executive and often was the only female on technology leadership teams, I thought I had to be perfect. I thought, you just have to show up like all buttoned up. And I wasn't vulnerable at all. And it wasn't until I became a little bit, a few years after that, maybe around in my early 40s, and I was actually asked to speak about my failures, when I became more open about that. And and then last year, when I went through a very, very, very difficult place and was in a really dark hole, I thought a lot about how this really difficult experience that I wish upon no one, but unfortunately lots and lots and lots of people are in that same dark place, how I could help others who are in that difficult place.
No, and one of the things I admire about you, Grace, is you're a woman of candor, but also a woman of courage. And it's not easy to talk about that. Oh, first of all, the physical things you went through, but more importantly, the depression that you suffered. And you've been so candid. And every time you post on it or write on it, I always say, "Boy, you're doing the world a favor, because I know you're reaching at least one person and maybe 100 at a time, or maybe more, and giving them hope and light." So I want to pat you on the back for that.
Thank you. Yeah, well, it's a gift to me if I can help one person who's suffering and maybe silent about it, be able to seek help or feel like they're not alone, then it's really worth it.
Well, there's a link that I don't mean to minimize it, but when you were talking about a woman who is in her 30s and about vulnerability in your own case, and you were talking about where you were, it's so easy for, men have a difficulty being vulnerable, but that's just basically letting down our guard in a little way. It's not but for women, it's much tougher in a management position, because sadly, if you are in a minority, i.e. the only one, and there's I think you said it, I have to be perfect. So.
Yeah. So women often suffer from, because I've heard this many a time in my coaching sessions, they feel like they have to be perfect. They over-prepare. I know I've done the same thing. Like when I was at HBS, I over-prepared to the point that I was too scared to say anything because I was so I think that over-preparation can be a bad thing. Being perfect, I encourage people don't be perfect. Don't strive for perfection. Perfection is not a good thing.
Right.
So women often talk to me about wanting to build their confidence. Women who are extremely capable, very capable women who don't have the confidence that you would think. And so it's something that I've written about. The UNC soccer team, the coaches have their women read a couple of books I've written about. So it's data shows that women have these challenges often.
Right. Well, you wrote something, it struck me and it resonated with me, that you said women can learn from men, but not be men. So I understand the words, but what led you to that conclusion?
Yeah, so I wrote that because I was remembering being on leadership teams as the only female, and I really thought, and I was a single mom too, I really thought, oh, well, I just got to be like the rest of the guys when we had really early morning meetings and I had a baby and I was trying to figure out, how to take care of the baby. I would figure out something. And other people had partners, spouses who were taking care of those things. But thankfully, that was many years ago. And with the Lean In movement, thanks to Sheryl Sandberg, changes have been made. So I think now women can just say, oh, well, that's not a good time. Or they can ask someone to their spouse, or if they're single, they can just figure out, they can just use their voice and realize they don't have to be. And people, I think now, thankfully, are more careful. A lot of changes in the positive have happened as far as work-life balance and understanding.
Right. But there's something else that it's learned from men, but I mean, women are women and should be, be yourself.
Yeah. So also, So women have strengths that they should let shine instead of being like tough and manly in that sense. They should show and reveal themselves. They don't have to try to take on manly traits. In the situation, the reason I wrote that was because of like Bill's example I shared with you. But I think that now, these days, thankfully, individuality is more embraced. And so women are different from men, obviously. And they should embrace that and not be fearful of showing.
And that's important. And I'm glad that times have changed enough. So my daughter's generation, even, and even younger, have that feel women can be women, and that's what it should be. And but the challenge, and then there's something else about confident, or you talk about confidence. So
John, you also
confidence and competence. Yeah.
Oh, just one other thing about the women thing. In thinking back on mentors that I've had, most of them have been men, just because there's more male, especially in the decades when I was maturing in my leadership. There was a lot more men to have as mentors, and I think that men help each other more than women help each other. So I actually think that women can learn from men in that regard. It to be sort of like men, like they don't overthink it. Like if a guy asks a guy for some favor, they don't think, oh wow, I have to ask a favor. They just do it. And so I encourage women to learn from men. So that's what I meant by that part, that we can learn from the good things. And I think I applaud women who are helping other women.
That's great. And it's being, and the notion of being a sponsor, which can be both a male and a female. And that's a positive. You talk about confidence too, and how it's related to competence. Explain, it's something I play with. Well, I've written about myself, but what's your perception on that, Grace?
Yeah, so the books that the UNC soccer coaches read, the research shows that it's confidence trumps competence. So that's very interesting, that maybe someone may not have the highest IQ or may not have been as book smart or a straight A 4.0 student, but if they carry themselves with confidence and express their viewpoints in such a way, they can be more successful. So that could be encouraging to people who maybe aren't like genius level, or they're not quite as book smart, but the way they use their voice, carry themselves in meetings, and however they carry themselves in different places around their peers and colleagues and bosses, that can make a huge difference.
Great. There's a corollary, I think, to confidence, and that is courage. And you are a woman and an executive who has exerted that. So do you see a link between the two?
Yeah, well, confidence does take courage, because you have to have the strength to do things that you're fearful of. And interestingly, so many people who you think are like, oh, wow, it just comes naturally. I actually think that everyone, even a very, very tenured speaker, it's good to be a little nervous when you step on stage, because that means you really care. And so I think that it does take courage to do most anything that matters in life. So it's very important to have that. I think it gives you a little energy when you have it.
And yes, you also linked into the concept of confidence and energy. So what's the link for you, Grace? So
Yeah, so I think they're very correlated because I think confident people emanate energy. They appear to have a lot of energy, and they help other people become more energetic because they exude confidence, which other people can feel, and then other people can feel more energetic by listening and being around someone who's confident. That's contagious. I think confidence is contagious.
And that's something, yeah, wonderful. And that's something that near and dear to me when I talk about energy and leadership. It's that leaders must radiate energy because that brings people together. I mean, do you want to be and just think about it. Do you want to hang around with somebody who's really low key all the time or high energy? Now there's limits on both, but energy is contagious. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. So now we touched on it before, happiness. So you recently, I'm going to put you on the spot to do a book report. You heard a lecture at your reunion. It was HBS, and Arthur Brooks spoke about, he is a professor of happiness and a well-published and best-selling author on many topics, but his newest book is Strength to Strength. So is there any glimpse that you got from that you want to share with us today, Grace?
I'm Arthur Brooks' biggest fan. And he really meant a lot to me because last year when I was suffering from a depression, I logged in to a virtual, my virtual 30th reunion from Harvard. This past week was my in-person postponed one, but we had a virtual one, and he was our keynote speaker, and he talked about his book. And that reminded me that, oh, wow, okay, 7 years ago, the studies of happiness and positive psychology did really help me. And it kind of, and even though I was in a dark hole, it gave me a little hope, which is very difficult when you're depressed. So he sent me an advanced copy of his book. I reviewed it. And one of the things, to answer your question, that really meant a lot to me is his bringing up the research that has been done on crystallized intelligence. And that's the intelligence that you and I have now that we're in.
Yeah.
I am, maybe not you, but
I can tell you my knees are crystallized. No.
So crystallized intelligence. So a coach is a really good vocation for leveraging crystallized intelligence, as is being a professor. And he shares how the best professors, for instance, at HBS are over 70 because they crystallized intelligence. So it's accumulated expertise through life's experiences that you can share with others. And so that really brings me happiness. It's helping others brings you happiness. So the greatest you can get for yourself is helping others. It's very much of a virtuous cycle because of course people will benefit too. And
then there's the other kind of intelligence, which is the my word, and I don't remember it, the acquisitive. When you're in the learning process and you're more book learning and experimentation, and you get your Nobel from that.
Yep,
but
exactly.
But the crystallized gives hope for people like me, because it essentially distilled wisdom. Would you not agree?
Yeah. It takes years. It takes time to develop that. So older people have that gift, whereas when you're younger, you can't have that gift because you just haven't had that passage of time and experience.
Right. So that's good. And so what's the link between, and I know you've thought about this and written about it, is happiness in leadership? Do leaders need to be happy? And what's your conclusion of that, Grace?
So when I first started my happiness studies many years ago, I learned that, for instance, early in my life, I was like, just when I achieve this, like just when I become an executive or just when I become this, I'll finally be happy. But it's not that way at all. Happiness is what creates success, not the other way around. Success doesn't create happiness. So the same thing I believe with leadership is that being happy will help you become a better leader versus the other way around, that being a good leader makes you happy. So that's why.
Absolutely. And that is very much the theme of Marshall Goldsmith's new book, The Earned Life. And it's the trap of I'll be happy when XYZ. And that, just what you said, that's not what's going to happen, because it's the fulfillment that you get, and enjoy the journey and the giving back and all of that stuff. So, and coming back to this theme of what role does confidence play in happiness? Okay.
Yeah, so I think that having self-efficacy, like believing in yourself and being confident in yourself, will help you with your happiness. Because if you don't believe in yourself, it's really difficult to have that. So certainly, if as a leader, you have to believe in yourself, because it'll be really hard for other people to follow you if you don't believe in yourself.
Without question, and that's part of it. Now, the topic that I'm going to throw another curve at you. So, but I'm giving you a heads up, it's coming. So, the downside the flip side of confidence is self-doubt. How do you deal with self-doubt, Grace? So,
yeah, well, I think we deal with it all the time. So it's a mindset shift. So thinking, instead of being fearful, like using that fear to your advantage, and thinking, for instance, okay, if I try this, I'm scared of this, I don't think I can do it. Then you think, okay, well, if I try to do it, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? And many years ago, one of my mentors, who was a professor at UNC, the one who invited me to teach at UNC, he asked me what my greatest fear was. And I thought about it quite a bit, because I really respected this individual. And I thought, well, one thing that I feared ever since I was a little girl was diving into a pool head first. I just never learned to do that. And I thought about, like, why was I fearful of it? I thought I'd do a belly flop and embarrass myself. I thought it would hurt myself, my body. And then I decided to hire this Ironman athlete, who was my swimming instructor at the time, to teach me. And so we went to aquatic center that had a deep end where it was really safe, and she taught me the proper technique. And I realized, once she taught me, that it was easy, it was elegant. And I realized that I thought about it, and I thought, well, maybe I need to think metaphorically about myself when I have fear and doubt, that I can just think, oh, just dive in head first, like figuratively.
Yes.
And I've done it literally, because this mentor had asked me about greatest fear. I was able to address it. So that was a pretty cool finding for me.
Great. And I'm glad you did. When I asked about doubt, you said something. It comes with us. It's around us all the time. And some people might be watching this and they go, well, Grace is a very successful person with a distinguished academic career, overcome adversity, and runs a successful company. What doubts would she ever have? But you have doubts because you're a human being.
Definitely. Yeah. And my latest posts were about how petrified I was first year at Harvard Business School. And so definitely being surrounded by people who, I've definitely been in situations where I had a lot of self-doubt.
Yeah. And I have a theory that self-doubt is actually a positive, in the sense it's a kind of a governor on our system. Now, if we become paralyzed by it, then it's a different thing. But I loved your story about the learning to dive. You said, hey, I got to address this. And you found a methodology and hired a coach and did that. So that is a way of dealing with doubt.
Yeah, and also you can think about, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? And also, the worst thing that happened is I do a better belly flop. But then I got the proper coach to help me not do that. And then you think about it, if the worst thing isn't that bad and definitely survivable, and then you think, what's the best thing that could happen? And if it's usually really good, so then you get over your self-doubt.
There's another theme as we're coming closer to the end of our show, and you've written about it before, and I have too, and it's purpose. So how do you, your experience as a successful executive and teacher, but also coming through some personal challenges, what have you learned about purpose? So
I think that it's evolved, because I have said that your success is our passion for your company's success. I think that now, given like last year, I think purpose has refined a little more. Because, for instance, I've done a lot of work. I've created 7 themes I call Project Peak that I used to call it climbing the mountains of entrepreneurship. And then I decided to change it. And that was actually a section mate of mine who's a professor at HBS. He said, well, like Clay Christensen, his latest book, which ended up being his last book, What's the Meaning of My Life? So I changed it to climbing the mountains of life, business, and beyond, because it's really your whole life. And my positive psychology certificate was from this institute called the Whole Being Institute. Your whole being, your whole being. It's your personal and your work life, and it can really intersect. So I think of purpose as being maybe larger, like really helping other people,
Right,
and helping their whole being.
Right. And I like that because too often we think of purpose as fixed, but it does evolve with ourselves over time. We discover new interests or new opportunities or new challenges, and we adjust to them. And yours is good. So now we link it back to purpose. Is there a link for you between purpose and grace, which is not just your first name?
Yeah. I love my name. I appreciate it more and more as years go by that my mom named me as such. Yeah. So I think, for instance, from a biblical, Christian perspective, grace is what God gives us that is perhaps unearned. And I think my being going into a mission and getting much better was from a lot of prayer and grace that was given to me. I think that I often tell my clients to give themselves grace because they share with me everything that's going on in their life. And usually because they're high achievers, they're leaders, they're really hard on themselves. And I remind them of all the good things that they're doing and that they should give themselves some grace. So I think giving someone the permission to have grace is a real gift. And I think it's something that leaders need to be reminded of because they've gotten into these places of leadership because they've really done a lot of great things and they do great things for other people and they inspire them. But sometimes leaders are too hard on themselves, which can make them good. But then if they're too hard, they need to give themselves some grace.
That's a very powerful concept, Grace, because we, especially leaders who are achievers and they're outward directed, they tend to overlook their inner life, or if they're looking at the inner life, I'm not good enough, or I should have done this, X, coulda, woulda, shoulda type thing. When it's give yourself a break, and so coming from you, that's a powerful lesson. So it's been wonderful talking to you and so much to share. So Grace, how can people find you?
So my website is savvygrowth.com. Folks can also connect on LinkedIn with me. And I have a newsletter through LinkedIn that I distribute on happiness and leadership. And I'd love for you to join that community, for your listeners, viewers to join.
Well, we will put your website in the notes, and I do advise people who are LinkedIn listeners and the world at large to sign up for your newsletter because I read it regularly and I'm always learning something from it.
Yeah, so I'd love to help people become happier. And
well, you're doing it. So, Grace Ueng, it has been an honor to speak to you today. And with that, we will close out.
Thank you so much, John.